Tonight, we are still doing a study on rightly dividing. I know it seems like I'm belaboring this, but it's such an important topic for us to be on that time would fail us to cover every little angle we need to cover. We've been covering words with multiple meanings, and I figure I give enough illustration of that you probably can follow that. And so I think what I need to do now is I need to move on to the next subject in rightly dividing. We're still in the rightly dividing context. There is a lot of natural divisions in the Scriptures. Now I want to talk about one tonight. The Bible says to study, show thyself approved unto God, a workman needeth not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth, 2 Timothy 2:15. Command to study, only found in your King James Bible, right? And so, by way of introduction, I know you've heard that over and over, but what does that mean, rightly dividing? If the book tells you to rightly divide, there must be divisions, right? So you have to cover those divisions if you're even going to study right. And so we've gone through weeks already. We've probably gone through 7 or 8, maybe 9, 10 weeks of this already. Probably go through that many more because there's so much to study on this issue that'll help you. Now, tonight, I want to dig a little bit deeper. We're going to dig a little bit deeper. And so tonight, what I want to cover is found in Romans chapter number 9. Now, you'll find a word here, and the reason I like to hit it from this angle rather than the angle of time periods of dispensations, and we'll cover that. I think the covenants cover it better. Now we're looking at words, multiple meanings or multiple ways to express the word. I want you to see this in Romans chapter number 9, verse number 1. I say the truth in Christ, I lie not. My conscience also bearing me witness in the Holy Ghost, that I have great heaviness and continual sorrow in my heart, for I could wish myself were accursed from Christ for my brethren, my kinsmen according to the flesh, who are Israelites, to whom pertaineth the adoption and the glory. And notice what it says here. The what? What's the word? Covenants. Do you see the plural? So, as pertaining to Israel, now we could read on, but as pertaining to Israel, there were covenants given. Covenants given in the Old Testament, and we see a new covenant given in the New Testament. Okay? So if the Bible says there are covenants, then you have to figure out what are the covenants. If you see a word like that in the Bible, don't ignore it. Don't ignore it. Ask yourself, wait a minute, this word is plural, so what are they? Right? And go back and lay them out. I told you from the beginning of this, some people teach this based on what a man taught them. I've been taught a lot of things, and I have knowledge that I could just lay it out the way I've been taught. But if we're going to rightly divide, we have to rightly divide based on the terminology of the Scriptures. Agreed? So we have to be careful that we rightly divide and the Scriptures interpret the Scriptures. The Scriptures show you the division. So if there's covenants, we have to begin to look at those covenants. Now you find 8 made. Some people group the first covenant together, which we're going to talk about tonight. I'm going to lay them out. Hopefully, I intended to get here early, and I was grazing by trying to get out of work and all that, and write all these up so you'd have them right off the bat. But we're going to do that tonight. But I want to cover the first one. If the Bible says there's covenants plural, and notice it doesn't say covenants as of right now in the New Testament. It's saying covenants plural that was given to Israel. So you have to go back and begin to lay them out. Now you'll hear this term. It's also found in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, Ephesians chapter 1, verse 10. You'll hear this term dispensation, right? A dispensation of grace, right? Dispensation is a time period. Now, what you don't find in the Scriptures is dispensations plural, right? So I think the best way to define the time periods is based on the covenants, right? The covenants best define the time periods. There's promises and basically a covenant is an agreement made between two parties, right? So now while dispensations, we know the dispensation of grace was brought by Jesus Christ. The law came by Moses, Matthew chapter number 5, but grace and truth by Jesus Christ, right? Jesus said, I've not come to destroy the law, but to fulfill the law. But grace and truth came by Jesus Christ, right? So a dispensation of grace, time period defined by the Scriptures, a dispensation of grace would be brought in by Jesus Christ and what He did on the cross. So again, stick with the Scriptures to define your terms. Don't go trying to get some college professor's term. And why do we need to take a term that nobody understands? Right? You read in your Bible, there's terms. Let me just give you, I don't get hung up on them. You hear me use them all the time, you know, when trying to teach people like Bible school students and all that. But use the Bible term. We use terms like eschatology. You know, the study of end times. You got all these ologies, and it's all a big fancy word, and it all sounds good, and that's fine. You know, however you want to do it. But why not just use a Bible term? Why not just use what... Listen, I'm not a highfalutin person. I don't know about you. I'm just a common man. So let's just stick with what the Bible says about it. It's just an easier way to define it, right? Listen, I think God wrote the Bible so that common people could understand it. He didn't write the... Listen, it was common people that He came to. It was fishermen. It was just the tax collectors. It was just you had a doctor there, the physician, Luke, but it was common, mostly common people He came to, and they understood it. There's nothing hard about it. The Holy Spirit working through common people is very powerful. He reveals things to us and helps us understand. So, notice this term is used again. Ephesians chapter number 2, Ephesians 2. This term covenant is used in context, plural again. What did I tell you? Ephesians 2. Look at Ephesians 2. He says, verse number 11, wherefore remember that ye being in time past Gentiles in the flesh, who are called uncircumcision by that which is called the circumcision in the flesh made by hand, that at that time you were without Christ, being aliens from the commonwealth of Israel. Now watch. Strangers from the covenants of what? Plural, covenants of promise. So, a covenant is even defined in the Scriptures. It's a promise or an agreement between men or God based on conditions, usually. Now listen, there are some promises that are unconditional, right? That God makes us. But generally, a covenant is something that's conditional. If you do this, I'll do this. That's a covenant. It's a covenant agreement. Okay? If you don't do this, I won't do this. That's the covenant. So, as we begin to look at these covenants, I want to lay these out for you if I can. Lay these out for you. Now, you're going to know these. Now, you're probably sitting here thinking, why in the world? What are these covenants? What are these promises? You know some of them. I know you know some of them. But when I lay them out, it's just going to make so much common sense. It's not really that deep. People try to make it harder than what it is. There's number one, the one we're going to talk about tonight, the Edenic covenant. In other words, essentially Eden, what happened in Eden. There was a covenant that was there. I'm not going to write out the whole word. I'm just going to... And number two is the Adamic. Now, we know these. And these are going to be marked by dispensations, y'all. What I want you to see is that covenants, generally, the end of, or when a covenant matures, generally it ends with disobedience or it ends with a transition to something else. Okay? So what you see here, now think about it. Let me just put it in this order. So there were certain promises. We're going to talk about number 1 tonight. There were certain promises made in the garden. Agreed? There's more promises there than you might realize were actually made. There is a covenant that God made in Genesis chapter number 1 and 2, and they were conditional. You know one of them. You should know one of them. This time period, dispensation-wise, a lot of people like to give it labels, would be called the Age of Innocence. Now you know what began, now notice the transition from here to here. What caused this time period with the new covenants that God made with Adam? The new covenants that He made were after Adam's fall, and He told them the curses that they were going to have on them. That was a covenant He made with Adam. And so what caused this transition right here from the Garden of Eden to Adam's fall? Was it not a covenant that God made that if you don't touch this tree right here, right? But there's other things that are in there that a lot of people don't stop and think about, other than the tree. Listen, this covenant right here is marked by a choice. What you learn about the Garden of Eden, and the reason this time period is so important, I saw this puppet. It was hilarious. I saw this picture. It was like a cartoon. And it was God reaching around a tree, and He had a snake on one hand, and He had Adam and Eve with a puppet dangling them on the other hand, and it was illustrating Calvinism. It was making God the author of sin, showing that God, but that's not the way God did it. The reason these time periods are critical for you to study and look at, God did not create sin, and you're going to see that when we study the covenant. He created a choice. One thing He gave us, He's a sovereign God. Calvinists like to say, He's a sovereign God. He can do whatever He wants to do. Agreed! And what He chose to do in the garden was give you and me choice. And what He chose from that point on was to give me and you choice. This time period in the Garden of Eden is referred to as the Age of Innocence. This time period right here is the age of conscience, the dispensation of conscience. It's when God began to work it on our conscience. We'll go over some of this. I probably ain't going to get to all of this. I'll probably just get the introduction tonight, and then we'll take 1 or 2 a night. Probably only get 1 tonight. But I want you to see this. Some people put these two together, but the reason I separate them is because one of them is an innocent time period, and the other is a time period after the fall. So one is pre-fall, one's after the fall. So they're not the same. Mankind wasn't the same, y'all. Listen, the curse that was given to you ladies, the curse you still have, the curse that was given to us men, the curse we still have, the curse that was given to that serpent, the curse he still has. Listen, it all has to do with the covenant during this time period. Now, you know the next covenant. It's marked by a time of trouble. What's the next time of trouble after Adam? Noah, isn't it? Did God not make some promises to Noah? He even made promises after He destroyed the earth with Noah's time period. We see that, right? So, and we'll finish that. We'll take a look at that rainbow and the covenant that He made there. They call it, I don't know. We'll try to stick as close as we can to Bible terms. Noahic time period, the Noahic covenant. What's another covenant? Who is somebody else in the Scriptures God promised something to? Huh? Moses, but not yet. There's one before Moses. We got Noah, but yeah. What's that? Abraham. And then who? And ironically, if you look at the Mosaic law, there's more than just thou shalt not, those time periods. There's three sections of the law. There's the moral law, civil law, and ceremonial. We'll get to all of them. I'll show you the difference. Because what happens is, I had somebody even in this church come up and ask me, is tattoos wrong? Yes, tattoos are wrong. Scripture says they're wrong. It was something the heathen did of that land, of that day, not to put any marks or cuttings of your flesh. I know a lot of preachers wishy-washy on it. I'm not. It was something the heathen were doing in their days. It wasn't something that the nation of Israel was doing. Right? Now, listen. If you do that stuff in ignorance, or you do that stuff because you're not sure and you don't know no better, it's not the unpardonable sin, y'all. You understand what I'm saying? But what I want you to see, so the person said, well, what about the other verses in the passage that said you're not supposed to mix cloth? Well, here's the problem. That's because you're not rightly dividing. There's a moral law, there's a civil law, and there's a ceremonial law. One of them was part of the ceremonial law. And we'll get to all this when we get there. But if you read the next verse, now this is my question, because they said, well, is that not just to the children of Israel? I said, well, let's read the following passage right after that in the book of Leviticus. The next passage says, thou shalt not prostitute thy daughter. Is that okay to do that? That's what I asked them. Is it okay to prostitute your daughter? Oh, I see. Now you have a problem with it. You believe it's wrong now. Listen, you have to distinguish between which part of the law is there. And they're natural divisions. We'll look at them. It'll take us a while to even get down. It'll probably be 3 weeks away from this Mosaic law. And, we'll cover stuff like that, little examples like that, so you understand some of that. Listen, we're not under the law, agreed? And a lot of people use that to say, well, none of that applies to me, so I can do whatever I want to do. Why would you want to do? Jesus said, I've not come to destroy the law, but to fulfill the law. Why would you want to do a practice, whether it's in their day or current day, that was associated with idolatry? The idolatrous nations were putting those marks on them. They were putting marks for the dead and marks, period. Listen, notice it says no markings for the dead, and then no cuttings in your flesh, and it says nothing printed upon your flesh, right? We'll get to there. We'll get to some of that. It's very complicated. Here's my heart about it. Because I'm not confused about what the Bible says. But there's a dear lady that we're friends with over in Beaufort, and before she got saved, she had tattoos one end to the other. And her husband, as far as I know, don't have any. I don't know. But her husband made a statement that really stuck with me and helped me, because she was loathing the fact that she had those things after she got saved. And her husband said, some people have tattoos on the outside, the rest of us have them on the inside. See, we all have some type of scar, some baggage, or maybe in our ignorance, even after we got saved, things we did, and even some things we did after we got saved on purpose. It's easy to criticize somebody else for something they did, and you forget all the things you did. Just be balanced in your life. Listen, I'm not here to play the part of the Holy Spirit. I am here to tell the truth and let that thing work on people's conscience. That's all you can do. That's all you can do. All right, number 6. Number 6. Who is somebody else that God made it? You know this guy. Yeah, your mama's already got it. Anybody else know the next some great character in the Bible who was a man after God's own heart? Right? Didn't he make David some promises that out of his throne, out of his lineage would come the Messiah? We knew that all the way back to Genesis chapter number 49. So the David, I don't know why they got to put IC on the end of it, but they just put IC on all of them. Edenic, Adamic, Noahic, Abrahamic, Mosaic, Davidic. So we could just say Eden, Adam, Noah, Abraham, Moses, and then David. How about this one? There's one other promise that you see that was made to the nation. Do you remember that one? It was made to the nation of Israel in general, right? And you see it really, it's foretold all the way back to Abraham, but it covers all of this. But notice it's the Palestinian, they call it the Palestinian Covenant, or I'd say with Israel, nation, Israel, nationally. Now, there's one last one that you certainly know. You know the last covenant. Huh? Yeah, well, that's my dyslexia. All right. But you could spell it right. All right, last one. You know it, don't you? Don't you know the last one? It's spoken of in the book of Hebrews. It's a new covenant. What is that covenant? That new covenant is better than bulls and goats. It's better than the Old Testament sacrifices, and Hebrews covers that new covenant so good. It covers it so good. So basically 8 covenants. And listen, can't you see those in the Scriptures? Those are natural divisions. I don't even have to really spell them out. Now, what I am going to do is try to cover the dispensational time period, what is going on during that time period, because there are different things going on. This is an age of innocence. They were naked and didn't even know. We're going to look at this tonight. They didn't even know. Walk around naked, whoop-de-doo. Something happened after that where they wanted to put them clothes on. Adamic nature, we see this. We see this right here led to this time period. This time period is going to be a time period of conscience. We'll get to all these. And we know the Mosaic law, we know the Davidic, the promises that were made there. We'll get to the things that was going on during that time period, because like even with this Davidic covenant, it has to do with the Messiah. Bringing in the Messiah, we'll look at some of the time periods. But I'll lay out the time periods as we go along. But these are the basic dispensations. 8 of them. If you want to put the first 2 together, I'm fine. I believe they're separate. I believe they're completely separate. Okay? So let's look at that first one. That first one that's on the list. Let's turn over to the book of Genesis. It's going to be the time period of innocence. I need to write that up there. This right here is the time period of innocence. So you could say it's a dispensation of innocence. Spell it for me, Mama. Did I do that right? All right. She's the speller. I'm the math person. All right. All right, let's go to Genesis chapter 1. Let's look at this first one tonight just for a few minutes by the way of introduction. We introduced the whole concept idea, try to give scriptural foundation for why we should study them to begin with. And so with that, let's delve right into the first one tonight. It's probably all we're going to be able to get done. So let's look at this in Genesis chapter number 1. Look at verse number, let's start at 26. The Bible says, "And God said, Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, that let him have dominion over the fish in the sea, and over the fowl and of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over the creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth." So God made man in His own image. In the image of God created He him. Male and female created He them. And God blessed them, and God said unto them. Now you heard me preach this on Sunday even. This is very important. What happens during these time periods is very critical. This is an age of innocence. And He told them to be fruitful and multiply. Be fruitful and multiply. The purpose of Him creating male and female is so that they can be fruitful and multiply. Notice the covenant it begins with creating them, and then He gives them a purpose. Do you see that? He not only creates them, but He gives them a purpose and charges them with that purpose. Now, I will say this, the word, if you'll notice here, listen, I'm not going to argue. Some preachers believe in verse number 2 that there's a gap theory there, that there was a pre-Adamic land. I don't believe that because it puts death before sin, and sin, the wages of sin is death. How could God look on everything and say everything is good unless He was just focusing down here? I'm not a gap theorist, but some people believe that there's a big, huge gap of time in Genesis chapter number 1, verse 2. I don't. Now, the problem is with the word found in verse 28. Now, this word in verse 28 it's not a problem for me because it has two different meanings, and it always has two different meanings. Look at this. And God blessed them, and God said unto them, be fruitful, multiply, and notice, replenish. So they say replenish means to fill again. I beg your pardon, but if you look it up in a dictionary, replenish also means to fill the first time. It's either or. Here's my issue. Now, I'm not saying there ain't some things that give you pause about the gap theory in general, and I'll probably teach on it one day. But I'll say this, as a whole, the common man is not going to get a hold of Scriptures and study it and study it and study it and study it and see a gap theory. This is my finding. I'm listening. There's people that may listen to this and may disagree with me. It's perfectly fine. You believe what you want to believe. But God wrote that book. He wrote that book in such a manner that a person with an honest heart could come to it and understand the basics of it. It ain't that hard. He chose the foolish things of the world to confound the wise. I don't think common sense, I don't think you can look at it and just read it and see that gap theory without being taught the basics of that gap to begin with. And we'll go over that one day, Lord willing. We'll go back and rehash some of this stuff, some of this dirt that I'm throwing up so you can learn. But listen, I want to provoke some thought tonight. But the word replenish, I want you to keep this in mind. It could also mean fill. It doesn't have to mean fill again. Okay? So there's no problem for me. The word replenish, it's not, you say, hey, you got an empty glass that's been sitting there, you say go replenish. It could be a brand new glass. It's not a problem. It doesn't, again, the word is used multiple ways. Okay? So, now listen, don't go away from here and saying that I believe everybody who believes in a gap is of the devil. I most certainly don't. I just got some problems with it. If you want to believe it, go and believe what you want to believe. I wrestle with it. I've looked at both sides of it, and one of these days we'll lay that out, Lord willing. But notice what it says. The purpose He created them for is to be fruitful and multiply and to fill the earth. Okay? Replenish it. Subdue it. He created them to subdue the earth, to have dominance over the fish of the sea and over the fowl of the air and over every living thing that moveth upon the earth. He gave them a command. Look, I want you to go do this. This is what you're going to do. Right? So notice this, along with that, verse number 29, and God said, behold, I've given you every herb bearing seed which is upon the face of all the earth, every tree in which is the fruit of the tree yielding seed, to you it shall be for what? One thing, after we get off the ark, that changes. So again, markers of time periods changing. Things being different in one time period that aren't in another time period. I'm saying you can see that based on the covenants that are given. That time period lasts for a certain time, and then there's a new covenant. Okay? There's another covenant that comes along. It doesn't necessarily disannul, but you see a change that happens. It doesn't disannul the dominance and some of the other things. We still eat all the herb-bearing, we still eat all that in addition to what we're doing, but it doesn't necessarily always disannul the previous covenant. Okay? So, notice this. Based on what it's saying here, go to Psalm chapter number 8. I want to say something along this line. Psalm chapter number 8. We find a little more insight on this. Psalms 8. Psalms chapter number 8. Let's look at verse number, let's just read down. He says, O Lord, our Lord, how excellent is thy name in all the earth, who has set thy glory above the heavens. Out of the mouth of babes and sucklings hast thou ordained strength because of thine enemies, that thou mightest steal the enemy and the avenger. When I consider thy heavens, the work of thy fingers, the moon and the stars which thou hast ordained, what is man that thou art mindful of him, and the son of man that thou visitest him? Thou hast made him a little lower than the angels, and hast crowned him with glory and honor. Look at verse 6. Notice the purpose. It's emphasized here in the book of Psalms. Thou hast made him to have dominion over the work of thy hands, and to put all things under his feet, all the sheep and oxen, yea, and the beasts of the field, and fowl of the air, the fish of the sea, and whatsoever passeth through the paths of the sea. O Lord, our Lord, how excellent is thy name in all the earth. So again, this time period. Now you think about this. Think about the difference during this age of innocence. Do you think about this? I think about this all the time. Adam calls all them little animals to him and names them. How does he? The Lord brought them to him. They weren't fearful of him. That fear did not come until this covenant was passed and the next ones come on, especially the ones after you see that fear starting to creep in, even during that time period of the next covenant, which is the Edenic. You see a man killing his brother. You can see the fear that's there. The death that begins is brought by one person murdering another person. So that fear is starting to set in, and you definitely see it after they get off the ark. You see the changes. Now, what would a world be like? Now, I'm just going to give you a glimpse. If you start thinking about this, the Bible speaks about a child putting her hand in a cockatrice den. It talks about a lamb laying down with a lion. You think about that. You think about the difference during this time period and the millennial reign that's coming up and the similarities that are there. You think about the references that are there. This world was absolutely different. It was completely subdued by man. You got Adam telling them what their names are. It was subdued. Listen, because of the breaking of this covenant, it caused problems in the earth. Every time a covenant is broken, even when you get down to the covenant with the nation of Israel, every single time they were in disobedience, what happened to them? When they broke the covenant they had with their God, He did exactly what He had said they would do with them. He put them in bondage, didn't He? You see that pattern over and over. That was a covenant He had with them. We'll read that when we get down to that covenant. So as you're looking through these covenants, you'll realize their natural time period is different. There's things that are different in each time period that you need to focus on and highlight. Because the Bible speaks of covenants. I didn't dream the word up. It's plural. So there's time periods in the Old Testament that we'll see. So let's go back to Genesis. Genesis chapter number 1. Let's look at chapter 2. Let's go to chapter 2. We can read down the dietary restrictions. Let's look at chapter number 2. Something else that was different. The purpose that God made for man before the fall. Look at verse number 7. Chapter 2, verse 7. God formed man of the dust of the earth. The breathed in his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. And so we see here that God brings life to us, and not only with that life, He brings purpose to that life. Look at verse number 15. And the Lord God took the man and put him into the Garden of Eden to dress it and to keep it. See the purpose that was there. Now, you say, man, that don't seem like it would be paradise. That's because you are trying to interpret this covenant under this covenant's terms. This covenant's terms right here is now you live in a sin-cursed world. Now you live in a world where your eyes are open, knowing good and evil. That's why we call it the age of conscience. We'll cover that next week. But listen, there's some changes that took place. What are some changes that took place between here and here? Well, number one, we die. Number two, we put clothes on because we knew we were naked. Listen, you see the changes that are here between these two right here. This was a different world. This world right here, we were dressing and keeping the garden, and there's no thorns, and there's no briars, and there's no sweat, and there's no trouble, and there's no trials. And all of that's gone. There's no childbirth with pains and all of that other stuff. That wasn't the intention of God. That was caused because of the fall. And let me say this. There was no conflict between us and Satan. The conflict was started when we rejected and a new covenant came. That's where the conflict started. Can you imagine a world where you don't sweat, don't have pains, don't have briars, don't have trouble? You can go out and throw the seeds on the ground and it's poof. Don't have to go out there and work your brains out. The devil ain't on your back all the time giving you a hard time. It's a different world. It's a different time period here, and that's what you got to keep in mind. It was an age prior to us sinning. Prior to us sinning. It is the time period, as one man put it, where the first woman ate the first man out of a house and home. I had to throw that in there. Amen. I'm glad y'all got a sense of humor. She ate of the fruit, and he got kicked out of the garden, so he didn't have a house and a home. Anyway, all right, you got it. Just give me the. So, Lord willing, what we'll do next week, I'm going to stop right here because I could just go on all night, and I'm subject to do that, so we got to have a stopping point. So what I want to do is show you this transition from this Garden of Eden time period to that Edenic nature that we get, how it changes. We're going to see that next week. What a change. Man, what a change that took place. And you look at it, and I'm saddened every time I read of this curse and the changes that take place when you get from chapter 1, chapter 2, you start to get into chapter number 3, and you see the changes that take place. You see the breaking of fellowship that we had with God. God was walking with them in the garden. Now you think about it. Listen, you ain't got no thorns, no thistles, no sweat, no pain, and God is walking. The devil ain't there, but God is walking with you in the garden. And you go from that to kicked out and kept out by guardians that are there, the cherubs that are there with swords ready to destroy you, and you're kept away from this fruit that could give you eternal life, and now you're in a fallen state, and your heart is sorrowful because now you understand God from the side of evil, not just the side of good. Do you know what? Before this fall, they only knew God from the side of good. They only knew the goodness of God in the garden, y'all. They learned the side of God that nobody wants to experience after the fall. Now, if you're saved, you know the lonely place. It's a horrible place when you're out of fellowship with God. And I couldn't even imagine living in a sinless body and then going from that, transitioning, now your first son is going to murder your other son. That's horrible. But we'll begin to look at these time periods. Now, I'm going to ask you this because I may have not explained everything well. Is there any questions? Does it make sense? I'm trying to be as simple as I can. I'm simple when it comes to how I like it presented to me. I'm trying to be very simple about it. Does this make sense, these time periods? They're pretty obvious, though. Okay? There's nothing up here on this board you should have went, oh, I didn't know that. Right? But you don't stop and think about it sometimes, right? So there's certain covenants. We're going to see the covenants he makes with people in each one of these sections. Okay? All right, let's stand for prayer.